Hello and welcome back to the Hindustan Times podcast. I'm your host Shashank Matu, reporting to you from Washington, D.C. Over the last few decades, it was hard to find anyone who had anything bad to say about Indian Americans. The standard cliche it became in American politics was for everyone to acknowledge, including for US politicians to acknowledge, the success, the hard work, and the contributions to America that Indians had made. After all, Indians went from practically not existing in the US around 60 years ago to becoming the richest ethnic group in the United States today. But now something has changed in American politics. Over the last year, we have seen a massive uptick in racist attacks online against Indian Americans. We have seen prominent figures who are advising the Trump administration characterize Indians as third world invaders. And it now seems like much of the Make America Great movement seems to have seized on this idea that Indian Americans may be part of this problem of Americans losing jobs and losing opportunities. So, what in the world is going on in America at this point in time? Joining us now to discuss exactly what is happening when it comes to Indian Americans and in American politics generally is Sanjeev Joshipura of Indiaspora. He works extremely closely with Indian diaspora groups all over the world, has been in the United States for around 20 years, Sanjeev, if I remember correctly from our
25.
last
Yeah.
conversation, 25
25.
years. So, of course, no one better placed than you to understand and help us understand. I think you've a lot of experience in American politics as well to help us understand what in the world has happened when it comes to Indian Americans and the mood around Indian Americans, especially among conservative sections of US politics. Over to you.
Thank you for having me, Shashank. Delighted to be here. I think there has been a change in the perception, as you said, of the Indian diaspora in America. Some of that, I think, is inevitable as two things happen. Number one, increasing success and recognition and visibility of the community. And number two, the perception that it's a zero sum game, that the size of the pie is constant and that we are not able to expand the size of the pie. And therefore, what I take, you lose, and what you take, I lose. This is the perception prevalent in American society right now. And so that's why this backlash has started arising.
Right. Could I ask you a little bit about where this backlash is coming from? Is this something that you have seen growing over a period of time, or is it something that just happened over the last couple of months, or early in the 2024 election campaign? Where is this coming from?
Well, I would say that the ferocity has been sudden and somewhat surprising. But there are people in prominent positions in the social media landscape in America and otherwise that I would argue are fomenting this to some extent as well. And their following on social media only amplifies it. However, it might have been latent under the surface for a long time. And to some extent, perhaps the Indian American community has been slightly complacent about this. And this is something that Indiaspora is now working on rectifying. I will say one thing though, Shashank, that social media only tends to amplify the loudest voices, sometimes on the negative side. I do want to stress that that is not the case. It's not true that everybody you meet in America in your daily life, in whatever part of the country you might live in, has strongly negative attitudes or racist attitudes against the Indian diaspora. That is not the case. But at the same time, it's not an issue that can be swept under the carpet anymore either.
Right. So, can I ask you, for people who may not have been tracking the story, who may not be online on social media as much as you and I perhaps unfortunately are, what exactly has happened over the last year? From my perspective, of course, just around the 2024 election campaign, especially when the H-1B visa debate was happening in the United States, there was this massive upsurge. If you were on social media websites like X, people coming out and saying just the most vile, horrific things about Indian Americans and the fact that they were stealing American jobs, that they didn't really belong in America. You had someone like Laura Loomer, who is a very prominent conservative far right spokesperson, an advisor to the Trump administration now, who called Indians sort of third world invaders. And that is the rhetoric that has picked up and has continued on social media websites since then. So that has been my perspective of what I have seen, and just like you have been surprised by the ferocity of this over the last year. Can you explain to people what have you been seeing in terms of what the problem is exactly, what exactly has happened over the last year or so?
Yeah. You're correct, Shashank, in saying that there are several people on social media that have spouted actually complete nonsense, to be honest with you. Things like, Indians are a disease in America. Things like, this is a white man's land and go back to your country. Various things like that. And I think that, like I mentioned to you before, there are two factors. One is, the size, the perception that the pie is not increasing, and the disparity among the wealthy elites and the others in this country, and then also the rising visibility of the Indian diaspora. But I do want to point out, in addition to that, that Indiaspora is one organization that is, really working to counter this vile and horrific kind of rhetoric, unhinged rhetoric, in some cases on social media. We do have a Twitter handle called, or X handle, I guess, called Real Indian American, where we do counter all of the rhetoric, the vile rhetoric, in a very measured, factual, unemotional, balanced manner, where we talk about how the Indian diaspora is contributing to all facets of American life, in the social landscape and the economic landscape, in many, many different ways. And I can go into some of these examples a little later today.
Right. Yeah. So let's just take a step back and then talk about the mood in the diaspora over the last year that you have seen this happen. When you talk to people who are seeing this kind of rhetoric, who are seeing the fact that some of these people, like I said, Laura Loomer, have found themselves in positions of power within the Trump administration. What is the mood in the Indian diaspora right now to go from being celebrated to now slightly controversial in some quarters? What are you hearing from people?
There is an increased sense of, of fearfulness. There is an increased sense among some people that they want to perhaps somewhat hide their Indianness or their differentness, if you will, than the mainstream, and perhaps a sense that they ought to appear or pretend to assimilate more. In some cases, they genuinely want to assimilate, and that's fantastic. But my point is that there is a fearfulness in among several people that is kind of compelling them to act that way here in America. So that has changed. And when you talk to several people in America that have been here, like I have been, for 20 years, 25 years, 35, 40, 50 years even, you do get one constant refrain, which is that this is not quite the same America as the one that I migrated to.
Right. And could I ask you this question about? I know I mentioned this two times. At the risk of repeating myself, I have to add that it does seem that a lot of this criticism about Indian Americans, some of it, frankly, extremely racist, is coming from groups that have aligned themselves with Donald Trump's "Make America Great" movement. It does seem to be coming from there, and the question is: this is a movement that is currently in power in the United States. Do you think that what we have seen over the last year is likely to be the new standard going forward in American politics and how it deals with Indian Americans?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Shashank. In diaspora being both legally and strategically a politically non-partisan entity, I don't want to get into blaming one person or one administration or one political party or anything of that sort. But I will say this to answer your question. Um, the concern that not only I but several people that I talk to feel is that regardless of the political dispensation in power, today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, looking at the polarization, looking at the divisiveness that exists in America right now on the whole, and then in particular, the vitriol directed against the Indian diaspora, as you mentioned, the concern is that regardless of political party in power, whether that milieu, that social feeling among some segments of society who have absolutely made up their mind that the Indian diaspora is a gigantic problem here, whether that perception will fade over time. And that is an open question. I don't have an answer to that question right now, as indeed I think the answer to many, many big questions in the American political landscape remains sort of for the asking in the years to come.
Right. And so let's then move into what we do now, which is that your organization in Diaspora is, as you were mentioning before, is working on these issues. Tell us a little bit about that. How does one change the perception? How does one deal with this issue politically? How does one organize the Indian diaspora to really address these fundamental political questions that are coming up?
Couple of things here. One is that, as I already mentioned, there is a short term tactical response, almost a rapid response, if you will, just like is practiced in political campaigns, where Indiaspora has this X handle, and Real Indian American is the handle, and we refute in a very factual, balanced, measured manner, unemotionally, some of the vitriol that is being spewed. Right, that's one. But that's short term and that's tactical. I think there is a longer term game to be played here, if you will, and one might take a book out of the Jewish community. The Jewish community in America has done a very good job over the past several decades, by the way, because one should keep in mind that the Jewish community's migration to America has been a lot older and is therefore now a lot more entrenched than the Indian diaspora here in America. But one can take a leaf from their book. They've done a good job in putting together various organizations, whether they are social organizations, community groups, political organizations, religious organizations, etc., that strongly stand up for the interests of the community. I think with appropriate modifications, because no two communities are the same, therefore the modifications are needed. No two situations are exactly alike, but with appropriate modifications, one can take a leaf from that community and learn what perhaps the Indian community needs to set up in the years to come.
Right. And we've talked about this. I think, I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I think the Jewish community comes up a great deal. There is a sense, I think, sometimes among Indian Americans that has come up, during this whole India-US diplomatic crisis that we saw a couple of months ago as well, which is that, why isn't the Indian American community better organized, better funded politically, better linked politically? Could you address that a little bit? There does seem to be this sense among people that the Indian American community is well known, until now well respected and well liked. But the challenges posed by this sort of onslaught mean that it has to be much more politically organized, and that is something that the Indian American diaspora does not have the political muscle to do yet. Why doesn't the Indian diaspora have that just yet? What has been the problem in the past?
Again, a very good question, Shashank. I would say a couple of things here. First of all, there are probably two or three issues that have really roiled the U.S.-India relationship in the previous several months. One has been, as you know, tariffs, and the other has been visas, and a third has been visas or immigration, and a third has been the treatment of the Indian diaspora in America. Now, there are organizations among the Indian community here in the United States that are making their voice heard on different elements of these three issues. Not all organizations are working on all elements, but different organizations are working on one or the other element, right? So that's one area I'd like to point out. But the second thing I'd like to say here is that the Indian diaspora, you're right, does not, as of today, have the kind of political clout that, let's say, for example, the Jewish community does here in America. Having said that, I think there are a couple of mitigating factors one should keep in mind. One is that, like I mentioned, the migration of the Jewish diaspora, if you will, into America is much older than the Indian diaspora, and they've had more time to settle in. That's one. Second is the Indian diaspora was in the phase from, let's say, 1980, 1990 onwards, right up to about almost 2015 or 2020, where the primary focus was economic opportunity in America. The thought process was keep your head down, keep working on your economic betterment and improvement, and other things will take care of themselves, kind of thing. It is only now, in the recent, I would say, 5 to 7 to 10 years, that the Indian diaspora has started becoming more vocal politically. And that is a natural evolution and maturation of any migrant community in any other country, right? Also, I would say one more thing. The Jewish diaspora has, in the past, has had one galvanizing issue that is central and existential that the Indian community does not have, and which is the very existence of the state of Israel. The Indian diaspora is not worried that tomorrow India will be wiped off the face of the map, right? Today, even the Jewish diaspora studies, sociological studies show that even the Jewish diaspora is getting a little less attached over time to Israel than it used to be in the past. But my point is, in the past, that issue was prevalent in a way that it never was for the Indian diaspora. The Indian diaspora is not a monolith. There are some Republicans, there are some Democrats, there are independents. So it's not like there is one organization or one political action committee that can speak for the Indian diaspora as a whole.
Right. And do you get that sense among the people that you talk to in the community that they are now willing to put the funds and the resources behind organizing like this? That you were mentioning, taking a leaf from the playbook of the Jewish community. Of course, they happen to be extremely well resourced and finance political efforts, which is what you need in American politics because money talks, as it were, in America. So. Do you get that sense that people are willing to put the kind of resources behind this? Because there has often been this sense, and I think we've talked about it as well, which is that lots of Indians come to America for a better life. They're not looking to get interested in politics. Their view of politics back home in India is that, look, it's dirty, it's murky, we don't understand it, we don't want anything to do with this. Decent people don't survive in politics. That's the view. And coming to America, they bring that view as well, and they don't give as much politically. They don't fund politicians, and that means their influence is less. Do you think that view is changing when you talk to people?
It's unfortunate that the American political system has not covered itself in glory over the recent past, as anybody who has read a newspaper article knows, anywhere in the world. And so that cynicism, I think, is deepening in some ways, and that's not just for the Indian community but overall, and that is, I think, extremely unfortunate. Having said that, like I mentioned, the Indian diaspora is rising to the challenge. If you look at the recent elections, not just in 2025 in New York, for example, and other states, but also in previous elections, one finds increasing numbers of Indian diaspora not only running for office, but also in both political parties, by the way, but also contributing to office, volunteering for campaigns, contributing, I mean, financially to political campaigns, volunteering for political campaigns. All of that is definitely increasing despite the overall climate of cynicism.
Right. And my last question then, Sanjeev, to you, I suppose, is this question of increased political representation for Indian Americans. Do you think that, we had Kamala Harris herself of Indian origin be vice president. We've had Zohran Mamdani win election as mayor of New York City. We've had Ghazla Hashmi become lieutenant governor of Virginia. We have Vivek Ramaswamy, who seems in pole position to be the only Indian American governor in the United States if he wins the governorship of Ohio. There does seem to be this rising tide of Indian American faces in American politics, and that seems to be a positive development. My question is, do you think that that is likely to help combat this rising tide of racism that we've seen in some parts of the US political system? Or do you, in fact, think that that is going to make Indian Americans even more prominent as a force that these groups will want to target? And therefore, we will, again, need to spend more on organizing, much more on lobbying, etc., to combat that.
It certainly will help. And it will help because Americans in public office on the Democratic and Republican side, by the way, you mentioned Vivek Ramaswamy. If he becomes governor of Ohio, he would be the only Indian American Republican governor or governor, period, currently in office if he becomes the governor. But in the past, there have already been Bobby Jindal and Nikki Haley. Um, I will say that public office is still perceived as public service, is still perceived as giving back to the community. And that is markedly different in perception than, let's say, being a technology company CEO or being a venture capitalist or being an entrepreneur. As the Indian diaspora's participation in the political landscape, even on the local level, by the way, even in terms of mayors in America who deal with local bread and butter issues that impact citizens on a day to day basis. You know, whether it's political participation, whether it's increased philanthropy towards causes here in America and not only towards causes in India. As we see that increasing, as we see more Indian Americans, let's say, donating not just to the Stanfords and the Yales, but also to community colleges, that will certainly help combat this perception that Indians are stealing American jobs, that Indians are only here to take things and don't care for the country and things like that.
Understood. Sanjeev Joshipura of Indiaspora, thank you so much for joining us here on the Hindustan Times podcast. Breaking down what I think is really one of these stories that folks in India as well as the United States have to keep their eyes on, which is this rise of online vitriol and perhaps racism against Indian Americans. It's a worrying story, one that we all have to pay more attention to, but also one that Indiaspora, your organization, is working on closely. Thank you again, Sanjeev, for joining us here on the HT
Thank you so
podcast.
much. Thank you so much for having me, Shashank. The last thing I'll just point out is that I know this conversation is about America and India and Indians in America, but this is an issue that is impacting the Indian diaspora in various other countries in the world that Indiaspora is active in, and where we've had similar conversations about other countries as well. But thank you for having me.
And then, and we'll have to have that conversation again sometime soon. But Sanjeev, thank you so much again for joining us
Thanks.
here on
Thanks a lot.
HD.
Thanks. Thanks. Bye bye.